Mrs. Sawyer, Mr. Sawyer, distinguished platform guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to Electric Boat on the launching of the fast attack submarine, Pittsburgh. A special thanks goes to the people who have come from Pittsburgh and other distant cities to attend this early morning ceremony. I am delighted to be able to report to you that last Wednesday we delivered the Augusta, a sister ship of the Pittsburgh, to the Navy 73 days ahead of current schedule. She is the 18th ship of her class to be delivered by EB. Two other ships of this class have been delivered to the Navy this year, along with two Tridents, totaling close to 60,000 tons of submarine delivered in 1984. And we at Electric Boat intend to keep up this momentum. Please permit me now to introduce to you the guests on the platform who will not be mentioned later on in the program. Chief of Navy Materiel, Admiral Stephen A. White. Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Engineering and Systems, the Honorable Melvin R. Paisley. Deputy Chief of Naval Operation, Submarine Warfare, Vice Admiral Niels R. Sundman. Commander, Submarine Group 2, U.S. Atlantic Fleet, Commodore Frank W. Butterworth III. Director, Attack Submarine Acquisition Program, Naval Sea System Command, Commodore Guy H. Curtis III. Competition Advocate General, Navy Materiel Command, Commodore Stuart F. Platt. Supervisor of Shipbuilding, Groton, Connecticut, Captain Robert F. Fox. Matron of Honor and wife of Richard Halloran, Mrs. Judy C. Halloran. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce to you the Chairman of the Board of General Dynamics, Mr. David S. Lewis.
Thank you, Fritz. I'd like to join Fritz Tovar. He didn't tell you who he is. He is the general manager of this yard, and he's responsible for all 60,000 tons. I don't know whether any of the boats were overweight, but I doubt it. But I would like to welcome also all of the people from all over the country, and most importantly, all of those from Pittsburgh, to be with us on this bright, sunny Connecticut morning. This morning, the Pittsburgh will be launched as the most nearly complete 688 submarine that has ever been built in this yard, which will ensure that another high-quality electric boat submarine will be delivered ahead of schedule. Today, we have in this area very few people due to the restrictions on the size of the building. But outside, where they can see this important new boat, the Pittsburgh, enter the water, are thousands of the men and women of Electric Boat and their families. And these are the people that do the job. And all of us, inside and out, please give them a big hand. Adding immeasurably to the occasion today is certainly the inspiring music of the Northeastern Navy Band from Newport, Rhode Island, led by Chief Musician Michael King. Give them a hand, please. Among the guests we have today, the official delegate from the city of Pittsburgh is Mr. Richard Halloran. Mr. Halloran is president of the Navy League of the United States and the Pittsburgh Council. He has served as an officer in the Navy with principal duty assignments aboard the guided missile cruiser USS Springfield. He was based later in Vietnam on a very important logistics service. He's presently a commander in the Naval Reserve, and in that capacity has had duty assignments at the submarine base here in New London. Mr. Halloran received his Doctor of Law degree from Duquesne in 1966. He served as counsel and corporate secretary of the Dollar Savings Bank from 1972 to 1980, and since then he has been an executive with the insurance firm of Marsh McLennan in Pittsburgh. Welcome to Electric Boat, Mr. Halloran.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lewis, and to General Dynamics Electric Boat Division. Good morning to Carol Sawyer, our sponsor, to George Sawyer, our speaker, and to Commander Raymond Setzer and the officers and men of the Pittsburgh Pre-Commissioning Unit. I am very pleased to bring the best wishes of the city of Pittsburgh, and am particularly proud to speak for the delegation, the large delegation, from our community. Among this delegation are members of the Navy League, the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh, the American Defense Preparedness Association, the Fleet Reserve Association, the Pittsburgh Navy, both active and reserve, the National Flag Foundation, U.S. submarine veterans, and by no means least, veterans of earlier USS Pittsburghs. Pride and perseverance in the face of adversities has over years tempered the spirit of our city. Those two traits are manifest here in the ship which will bear the name Pittsburgh. A true sense of pride should be borne by those who have toiled long and hard to carve and mold this great ship that we see before us. Those who serve in her should carry that same virtue through their own long and hard toils. The perseverance which after these so many months of labor has produced this product should be continued by the members of the crew as they embark on their mission in the defense of freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Halloran. It's my pleasure now to introduce a very distinguished American, Mr. Chapman B. Cox, the General Counsel of the Department of Defense. Mr. Cox is a native of Dayton, Ohio, a graduate of the University of Southern California, and he received his doctorate in law from the Harvard Law School in 1965, following which he served for 3 years as an officer in the Marine Corps, including duty in South Vietnam. From 1968 till 1981, he practiced law in Los Angeles and Denver before being appointed to serve first as Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Logistics and later as Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Manpower and Reserve Affairs. He was appointed to his present position by President Reagan earlier this year. Please join me in welcoming the General Counsel of the Department of Defense, Mr. Chapman B. Cox.
Thank you, David. It is a genuine honor and a personal privilege for me today to introduce the principal speaker at this magnificent event. Now, some of you who know the trouble that this company has been receiving from the media and certain politicians recently are probably saying to yourself, how can the Chief Legal Officer of the Department of Defense speak in such glowing terms of what is happening here today? Let me explain how I feel by telling you a true story. A year ago, after the Beirut bombing, some reporters went to Wiesbaden, Germany, to our Air Force hospital there to interview our injured Marines who had been taken there for treatment. One particularly aggressive reporter found a sadly mangled corporal and tried as hard as he could through leading and double-meaning questions to get the young Marine to complain about his country, to accuse his officers, and to criticize the commander-in-chief, but to no avail. Finally, after having no success thus far, the reporter thought that surely he would get the answer he was looking for by his last question. He said, "Don't you think this whole situation is unfair? They trained you to be a professional infantryman, but they ordered you to a supposedly friendly country, gave you no enemy target, restrained your use of weapons, and then some fanatic bombs you or tries to kill you with a car bomb. Don't you think that's a cheap shot?" The Marine thought for a minute, and then his chest expanded under his hospital bedsheet, and a wry smile came across his face, and he said, "Well, you gotta be pretty sneaky to fight the best." My message today is that when you receive a cheap shot or hear unfair criticism, just stick out your chest, smile to yourself, and say, "You gotta be pretty sneaky to fight the best." And we have the best here today. Your product, these 688 attack submarines, are the best in the world, and your leadership is the best. George Sawyer, your principal speaker, is the epitome of an effective leader and high achiever. His career is chock full of responsibilities which demonstrate his exceptional capabilities. As a young naval officer, he was a pioneer in the nuclear submarine program. In the early 60s, he was the nuclear power coordinator for Babcock and Wilcox. Later, he became vice president of International Bechtel. In the late 70s, he served as president and chief executive officer of John J. McMullen Associates. And in 1981, President Reagan appointed him as Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Shipbuilding and Logistics. In this position, I got to know George as my boss. I learned what a great achiever he was. He taught me that avoiding a challenge is never an acceptable option. One way to sum up his success as Assistant Secretary is to compare what he inherited with what he left. When he took office, cost escalation and delivery delays were the common way of doing business. His predecessor processed $10 billion of claims against the Navy for cost overruns. In contrast, George Sawyer's forceful leadership left the following legacy. During his last year in office, the Navy received delivery of 25 ships, an aggregate of 11 months ahead of schedule and $40 million under budget. That was also the first year on record that the Navy had put under contract all ships appropriated that year. And there were no outstanding claims against the Navy for cost overruns. George Sawyer is now a leader in your corporate family. He is Executive Vice President of General Dynamics Corporation for Land Systems and International, and he is a member of the corporation's board of directors. As I said before, your product is the best and your leaders are the best. I am very proud to introduce to you one of the best, my old boss and good friend, the Honorable George A. Sawyer.
Thank you, Chaplain Cox. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. In a few minutes, another U.S. Navy ship of the line will traverse these ways and enter the waters of the Thames River, bearing the proud name of the city of Pittsburgh. For many of us here today, this launching may seem rather old hat. In just the past 4 years, the United States Navy has sponsored 90 such launchings, 12 from this shipyard alone. Yet to witness these 6,000 tons of inanimate steel behind me suddenly surge to life as Pittsburgh glides to her true domain is always a thrilling experience. And for my wife, who enjoys the privilege of sponsoring this fine ship, and the Nucleus crew poised on the deck above us, today is a very special day indeed. As for me, this ceremony marks over 35 years of close personal association with the Groton, New London area, this shipyard, and the United States Submarine Service. The emotions which flood my senses and yours at this moment are very personal, and it is fitting that we reflect together the importance and historic traditions of this ceremony and what it represents to our nation and to us here today. When Pittsburgh commissions about a year from now, she will be the 33rd ship of the Los Angeles class of attack submarine. With 68 ships ultimately planned for this very successful submarine class, Pittsburgh represents almost the halfway point in construction of what will be the mainstay of our attack submarine force for the next 20 years, a force unsurpassed in the world today, and a force that the Navy and this administration intend to maintain as the world leader. Building upon the technological revolution, which was led by Admiral Rickover, which introduced the safe and highly successful harnessing of nuclear energy in the USS Nautilus over 30 years ago, a modern attack submarine such as Pittsburgh is every much a ship of the line as the heavy cruisers of the past, the type of ship which last bore this name. This Pittsburgh will be the first of her class to be fully outfitted with a battery of vertical launch cruise missiles. She will be capable of taking the fight to a potential adversary at long range, either on the high seas or ashore, in addition to defending our Navy's battle groups and protecting the nation's essential sea lanes of communication. We can have no doubt that she will be worthy of her name and will reflect well the illustrious history of her three predecessors in the United States Navy. The Pittsburghs, which have gone before, have carried this name into the annals of U.S. Navy history through courageous engagements in 3 major wars. Now, our hope and prayer today must be that this Pittsburgh will carry on the traditions of service and excellence, but never in her lifetime experience the need to use her great powers in war. Nautilus herself, our first nuclear submarine in over 26 years of active service, never fired a shot in anger or fear. May the same words be spoken some 25 to 30 years hence on the day of this Pittsburgh's decommissioning ceremony. Certainly, that has been and should remain the fundamental goal of the leadership of our nation. Truly, the most effective use of military strength is deterrence. History repeatedly and with clarity shows that only a nation which remains strong can deter a determined adversary from adventurism and ultimately aggression. This has been a fundamental precept of this administration and the rationale for the major naval reconstruction program which began in 1981. The program, so successfully undertaken to date, has been simplified in the media by the slogan, the 600-ship Navy. But it has been in reality much more than that, much more than simple numbers or ship construction. It has involved increases in procurements for the entire Navy Marine Corps team, major improvements in the acquisition process itself, which really have produced large savings in costs and added efficiencies, marked improvement in the quality as well as the quantity of her new recruits, numerous morale-building measures for our men and women in service, with the result that more and more are deciding to ship over and remain in the Navy as a career. Significant gains in the readiness and sustainability of our Navy and Marine Corps forces, and a rebuilding of our essential logistics support and sealift capabilities. Now, after 4 years of hard work, the nation and its leadership can look back with the pride of accomplishment. For by the end of this decade, the 600-ship Navy, with all that that entails, will be reality. When Pittsburgh herself commissions next year, there will be fewer than 50 ships remaining to meet the 600-ship goal. The numbers and capabilities of this new Navy, and the most importantly, the renewed pride and increased skills of the men and women who comprise today's Navy, clearly attest to this revitalization. A Navy worthy of her proud traditions and a true deterrent, fully capable of preserving peace with honor. I would be remiss not to comment on the contributions made by industry in this naval reconstruction program, particularly the men and women here today who are building Pittsburgh. To you, I would like to acknowledge my association with this shipyard and some old friends present, which extends back in time to 1957. You designed and built Triton well then, as you have built so many fine ships both before and since. Your continuing dedication to excellence in quality and performance is rooted clearly in the knowledge of the demands of the technology which you have applied so successfully since Nautilus, as well as the needs of the Naval Service, with whom this company has been closely associated for almost 85 years. The men of Pittsburgh know that they will go down to the sea on the finest ship built anywhere in the world today. I have spoken of pride and tradition and the renewal of that spirit within the Naval Service. Of course, the service is only a mirror of our society as a whole. This renewed Navy, renewed in both physical and human resources, could come into being only with the support of our nation. We are building our fleet today because the nation has wanted it and continues to want it. We have capable and highly motivated young men and women in our armed forces today because the nation once more regards service in defense of one's country to be an honorable profession worthy of the respect of all people. Thus, we have had a consensus, and we continue to enjoy a consensus, for building a strong defense. That consensus today is under strong attack, increasingly vocal and strident and increasingly personal. But I'm hopeful that we will maintain the strength of our convictions and secure in the knowledge that only through a strong defense will we maintain the peace. And as the bearer of a fine and proud city's name joins her native element en route to joining a proud Navy and the finest submarine service in the world, let us hold to our consensus and to our convictions and to our pride in this very great and good United States of America. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, George, for those very thoughtful and inspiring words for the men and women of this yard and for the United States Navy and the submarine service, which is so important to our country. We've all met some very important people here this morning, but none of them is nearly as important as the next that I would like to introduce. And she is the sponsor of the Pittsburgh. Carol Sawyer is a native of Chicago, but she grew up in Michigan, where she had upward mobility, starting out in a one-room country schoolhouse, and eventually, a few years later, received her undergraduate degree at Michigan State University as a Phi Beta Kappa. Next, she earned her master's degree with high honors at Western Michigan University and is now working on her doctoral in public administration at the University of Southern California's Public Affairs Center in Washington. Carol has been a hard-working professional educator for the past 17 years. She has worked with national and state educational organizations. She's served our government in the Department of Education and has written an important book entitled Educational Governance in the States. In her spare time, she is the full-time executive director of the educational Confederation, an association of independent schools in the St. Louis area. She has also been active through the years as an officer and member of a number of civic, educational, and political organizations. She and Mr. Sawyer are the parents of 6 children, and we're glad that a lot of them are here. Please join me in welcoming our sponsor for the launching of the Pittsburgh, Carol H. Sawyer.
Will Captain N.L. Crump, Chaplain, United States Navy, please come forward to bless the ship.
Chaplain, if you would, please.
Let us pray. O eternal Father, strong to save, who at the stirring of thy Spirit brought life to the vastness of the galaxy and the depths of the sea, we commend this submarine Pittsburgh and her launching to thy never-failing care and keeping. Preserve her from the dangers of the sea and the violence of the enemy, that she may be a safeguard under the United States of America and a security for such as pass over the seas upon their lawful occasions. Make her name great among the people of the city whose vitality is honored. We give thee thanks for the skill and construction of the women and men called to bring Pittsburgh into being, symbolized by the graciousness of thy servant Carol, her sponsor. Bless thy servant Raymond, his officers and men who will navigate Pittsburgh through the deep. Create and maintain in them a cheerful and ready spirit. In the day of challenge, suffer not their confidence in thee to falter. In the time of success, fill their hearts with thankfulness. Watch over their families during the days of separation. These things we ask for thy mercy's sake. Amen.
Mr. Sawyer will pose once more for the photographers. When ready.
In the name of the United States, I christen thee Pittsburgh. May God bless her and all who sail in her.